Hello. Welcome back to the SideQuest RPG Podcast. It's me, once again, your host, Smug, and I am joined by my co host, Mindz.
Hey, how's it going?
And this is going to be session 4. This is the SideQuest RPG Podcast, a place where we can just sit down, sit back, relax, talk about D&D, RPGs, and everything else we have that's in between. Last time, I know we had a week break. I was on vacation, but last time we talked about melee classes in Dungeons and Dragons. The good parts about them, their downsides, their upsides, things to think about when trying to play those classes. But this week we wanted to step back and change it over to ranged, but specifically ranged physical, which after going through it a bit, there's really not many options for it.
Well, there are, but they're all kind of support for the most part. I mean, you have your three main classes, and then everything else is either a hybrid or support. But yeah, like a true range, like an archer or like a javeliner kind of thing, there's not a lot.
Yeah, there's not many options, and the options you do have are kind of limited, but still doable, if that makes sense. I guess we can just start it off with the obvious one. When you're playing range damage, the obvious answer is a ranger. How would you
Ranger.
ever guess it? I don't know. Probably the first 5 letters.
Yeah, ranger, rogue is up there as well.
Yeah.
But before we get into classes, we should discuss kind of the overall benefits
Mm,
of playing ranged
mm.
versus melee. Like last week, we talked about the
Right.
extra attack and why ranged, why the melee classes get a lot of kind of big, consistent damage.
Right.
But why would you ever want to be ranged if the melees get all these, bonuses to attacks and everything else?
Well, the reason you would want to do that, in my opinion, is getting away from combat. If you have a character that likes to sit back and not be up close and personal, a lot of the ranged fighting classes, for melee at least, or for physical damage, I mean, a lot of those classes also can switch over to melee if needed. So there is some flexibility with a lot of these classes and how they work. But choosing that range damage as your primary damage type is going to put you away from the confrontation. So this kind of character wants to sit back. They want to pick off enemies from a distance, usually with 1 or 2 big heavy hits, and then slink back into the shadows, which plays into the rogues, which plays into rangers kind of well with their subclasses.
Not to mention, for mobility, a lot of the range classes are not going to be big, hulking behemoths. They're not going to be wearing chain mail. They're not going to be wearing plate mail. They're going to be wearing the lighter weight armor so that they can remain mobile,
Mm-hmm.
which also means that they are a much better choice for stealth options. Yes, you have the rogues, which are not really the frontliners, and the monks, who are melee. But also, if you like rangers, rogues, they are your main kind of stealth players.
Correct.
You'll be able to sneak through dungeons, you'll be able to take pot shots and potentially crowd control or take people out via assassinations before they can ever get to you or your party, creating basically a sense of safety, if you will.
Correct. Which gets them out of the way. Keeps them from taking the brunt of the damage, or, like you mentioned, assassination. While everyone else is dealing with a big group, they can take off the little guys that are beginning to swarm one shot at a time. And we'll get into it a little bit later, but there is also the difference of being able to attack multiple times in a turn, which some of these classes get the extra attack feature, but depending on the weapon or the style of play you're going, you can't use the extra attack, if that makes sense.
Okay, so now that we've discussed kind of why it's fun and why it's useful to have a ranged melee class in your party, should
We
start
can
off with the ranger.
actually start off with the ranger. So the
Typical
ranger,
Legolas stereotype.
yeah, the Legolas stereotype. Well, and one thing I do want to mention with the ranger is I also have a really big belief that the ranger isn't really, depending on your subclass, meant to be played as a long distance fighter at all times with bows. I feel that rangers really thrive when you have a good mix of survival skills outside of combat and them using a bow and a dagger as a secondary weapon, or a sword and some throwing knives as their secondary weapon. I always see them more as Aragorn from Lord of the Rings, where they're kind of combat skilled, but they have these survival skills to match with them. That's why I've always seen them as like the trackers and the hunters, rather than just, oh, I am bowman, I use big bow, hit big shot. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and there's there's multiple different ways to play the ranger. For example, I'm playing a ranger who happens to wield a pistol.
Correct.
And yes, I can hunt and track and survive, but really, I mean, we are playing a very gritty, darker dungeons rule set kind of thing. But for the most part, I am just ranged attack damage.
Correct.
We have our frontliner. I'm kind of the stealthy one. I can pick locks. I'm proficient with these tools. But for the ranger, I took the archery fighting style, which again, with the fighters, you have fighting styles. So you can be a dual wielding melee ranger. You can also be the typical archery or long distance ranger as well. But the rangers typically get pigeonholed into that whole ranged mechanic.
Correct.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It's
No,
a lot
yeah.
of fun. I mean, I am pulling off big damage. We're only level 3. But, I mean, if I'm doing 1d8, plus 4 versus everyone else who's doing like 1d6 or, 1d8 plus 2, I mean, the ranger is putting out more damage than anybody else. And at level
Correct.
5, I would get extra attack also.
Yeah.
But I can stay away and take pot shots at people and force them to try and come after me since I'm a bigger threat, while our barbarian and our paladins could go through and just clean up house or stop them from moving around with like sentinel and other type of abilities that are
Right. And there are some strengths and weaknesses to what you just said. One of them being you're able to move around a good bit. You're able to take the pot shots if you're playing that ranged build. But what I always find a weakness is you can't do anything. And this goes for a lot of these range classes with the range like fighting styles. You can't do anything once you're swarmed. A lot of the other melee classes, they don't thrive when being swarmed. Like we mentioned, the rogue does not do well in melee when being swarmed. Conversely, with the ranger, in the ranged fighting style, they just can't do anything because melee shots with your bows are actually at disadvantage in the rule set. So point blank is not good unless you're using weapons that allow for that, like pistols and firearms. They allow for that point blank shot to still go off. Point blank with your bows and crossbows is actually at disadvantage in the rule set.
Unless you take the the gunner feat or the archery expert feat at level 4?
Which some DMs don't allow, by the way. Some people don't allow the archery expert and the gunner. And if you're not using firearms, you're not going to get the gunner feat, of course.
Well, gunner will still give you the same. It'll give you proficiency, but it will also give you the same effect that people don't like in archery or crossbow expert, which is that you don't take or you don't make point blank shots at disadvantage.
Correct. But what are your thoughts on their strengths and weaknesses? Their strengths, obviously, are, to me, being able to pick people off. And their big weakness to me is getting swarmed. And this goes for almost every class we're going to talk about from here on, when it comes to ranged melee. But if you'd like to expound on that with what you know, I haven't played a ranged physical character in a while. I keep saying melee for physical.
Well, the ranged physical, I don't think it's an issue with getting swarmed
Okay.
because typically you are looking out and your first priority is to not get swarmed. That's why you have the mobility tactics. That's why you take pot shots and keep running away.
Correct.
Yes, you can put out, a decent amount of damage, but my biggest weakness as a ranged character that I found is bonus action economy.
Ooh.
You have one action, which is your attack,
Mm-hmm.
and then your bonus action is maybe as a ranger, you have Hunter's Mark, which sometimes, no, I think it's just a bonus action to cast, anyways. But aside from that, okay, I'm going to Hunter's Mark and I'm going to attack. I'm going to move, that's my turn. My next turn, I'm going to attack, and I have no bonus action. I'm done. I have no bonus action the next turn. So I move, I make an attack, and I'm done. It becomes very stagnant, and I wouldn't say boring, but it certainly isn't entertaining or exciting.
Correct.
And I know that we had talked about this a little bit because you were in that same campaign that I'm talking about with my Lizard
Right.
Ranger. And I mean, until you start taking a feat or gaining levels so I can gain new spells that may be a bonus action that will be useful in combat or some sort of role play utility kind of spell. You are the stealth person who may or may not be able to pick locks, and you can take one shot per round until level 5, of
Mm-hmm.
which you can take 2 shots around, but you don't do anything else.
Yeah, you're
And that's
kind
why
of shoehorned into what you do.
Yes, and I know a lot of people have reworked the Ranger class as a homebrew. A lot of people have updated or tweaked it, and a lot of people have just said, you know what, we're not going to do Rangers. I'm going to make a different class, and yeah, you can use whatever you want, or we can pick, you know, it's anything but the Ranger that Wizards of the Coast has released.
Yeah. Yeah, I know there's
Everything else I don't think is an issue, aside from the fact that they don't seem very powerful.
long term, I can understand why they don't seem powerful. However, I will say it kind of depends on your game. The current campaign I'm running, I have a ranger in the party at the moment, and the party itself has done so much better when it comes to exploration, having one in the party. If you are running a campaign that is inner city a lot, if you're running a campaign that is not focused on exploration, the ranger can really feel stagnant and at some points useless. With a ranger that has naturally high perception, good survival skills, they're making good survival checks when camping out. They're making good perception checks and tracking checks when tracking down animals and enemies they're trying to follow because of a ranger and his natural proficiencies. That it really has flipped my head on having a ranger in the party from the DM's perspective. Because previously I kind of didn't think they offered much beyond range damage, a couple different play styles, and fairly customizable. You know what I mean? They do the same thing over and over, but you can change how they do it a little bit, and that's about all they do. But from a DM's perspective, if you're playing in the right campaign, a ranger can be a powerful asset outside of combat as well.
Yeah, I think they're much more powerful or much more useful on the role playing side of things.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you get somebody who has homebrewed a ranger and said, okay, well, this is going to be, a beastmaster, and I'm going to make it a pet class, or they fundamentally change the kind of the mechanics of the class itself.
Correct.
It is much more appropriate as kind of an RP or as somebody who's going to be useful outside of combat, more so than being a combat, MVP.
Correct. They are very rarely the highest damage dealer. They're very rarely the crowd control of the group. They are not the tanks of the group. They kind of fit, to me, in this weird middle ground of good damage, but not enough to be stellar. Good RP, but not enough to be stellar. Good flexibility, but not enough to set themselves apart. So they really sit in this middle ground for me. But I do think in the right situation with the right DM, they can be very, very fun and be exactly what a party needs.
I would agree with that 100%.
So I would, if you are wanting to lean towards a ranger, I would recommend talking to your DM about homebrewing a couple things or seeing if they can get a couple more items to start out with to augment what they do have, when a lot of other people early game, and especially level 5 and below, they have access to so many different things and you're just attacking. As you mentioned, you just attack, move your hunter's mark if you need to, and attack again, and attack. Oh, I got to move this turn. So what I did for one of my characters is he has a long distance bow that can shoot a mile as long as he can see. And he has high perception because of some items he has. He is literally set to be a sniper class, and he does more damage from a great distance, and he has a big bow that only he can use, and he can really only use it outside of combat. Think of like a great bow from, if you've ever played Dark Souls, some of the giants have great bows. It's something along those lines made for a human. And we homebrewed this whole ability set he has for it that he can only use outside of combat to get big damage, and he can't use the extra attack feature on it like you can with a regular bow. And I wanted to get to this pretty soon because a lot of these classes are going to be using bows, crossbows, hand crossbows, light crossbows, things along that nature, correct?
Yes.
That's pretty much the only real consistent ranged physical damage there is. There's other things like javelins and things along those lines, but bows are the primary source. And your light bows, your hunting bows, and your long bows, your short bows, those are all able to use the extra attack feature. So you can shoot 2 arrows once you hit level 5 with those 4 weapons. Unless you, of course, homebrew something else to go along with it. The extra attack feature gives you a lot more damage as most of these classes. There's a problem you get to when you get to the crossbows. So anyone that wants to use a crossbow or some of the guns or the heavy crossbows, they have a loading feature, meaning you can only shoot once per round, which makes your damage output plummet for a lot of these subclasses and classes.
That is true, and that's why everybody takes the firearms proficiency, because they can't avoid that. As well as with the crossbow expert, I believe you avoid, or you completely ignore the loading property as well.
Yes. And my only downside with that is you have to get the crossbow expert feat. There is no, if you really want to play that, you have to pick up that skill, that one skill, to allow you to keep up with everybody else. And I personally do not enjoy that. I usually make it a class feature as a DM for them to be able to do that, if that makes sense. So they still have the flexibility to pick up something else, but they wouldn't get the secondary bonuses. Like the crossbow expert, I think also gives you, like you can fire from cover easier and stuff along those lines. I want to say it has a couple of secondary effects, but if someone truly wanted that to be the way they fight, I, as a DM, would make that one of their class features they get at like level 7 or something. that allows them to use
You're
their extra
talking about
attack.
the
That allows them to negate the reloading feature on weapons and still get their extra attack. Because I'm pretty
yes,
sure
but
the
at the
crossbow
same
expert.
time,
Mm-hmm.
I was going to say at the same time, I mean, why wouldn't you want to use crossbow expert? I mean, some people think it's too powerful, which is why it's a
Yes.
feat, but it's one of the
Yes.
ones that it absolutely has to. But if you're going to play a bow character, I don't know a single person who wouldn't want to
Well,
get crossbow
here's
expert.
here's what I'm saying. You just take out the avoid reload part of it and put it on a character. And if they want the other effects, because I'm pretty sure you get all the negating cover bonuses, you get the can shoot from prone bonuses and stuff like that.
Crossbow expert, you don't.
I'm pretty
You
sure.
only you ignore the loading of crossbows of which you're proficient.
Mm-hmm.
Being within 5 feet of a hostile creature doesn't impose disadvantage on your ranged attack rolls.
Okay.
And when you take the attack action and attack with a one-handed weapon, you can use a bonus action to attack with a hand crossbow you're holding.
Okay. And
those are the only 3 things for crossbow expert.
Right. And a lot of people say it's too powerful. And what I would do as a DM is take that first bit where you ignore the reload feature and put that in the subclass that your character in your campaign is using, so you can still pick up the crossbow expert if you want to. But if you don't feel useless in combat if you still want to use crossbows. Does that make sense?
Yes and no. Because here's, I think, one of the things that kind of adds, or it comes into play, I guess, the level of power of your game.
Correct.
Because if that's the case and you're going to start changing those types of feats, what about Great Weapon Master? You take the -5 penalty to the attack roll, and if it hits, you get +10 of the damage. Like, that is on kind of the same level.
Right. And like I said, it's case by case basis. If you're DM or you
Yes.
don't want to play it like that, that's fine. In my game, the way I play my game right now, I would do that and for one of my characters if we talked about it and they started to feel useless in combat. Because the one thing that I always push is no matter your play style, as long as you don't feel useless, just don't feel useless. That's the worst feeling for a player is useless. And a lot of these ranged fighting styles can really dig into that without specific things to make them useful. Secondarily, if that makes sense.
Yes.
There are
And
tertiary things that make them feel useless.
oh, I agree. And that's why if you're going to be playing a specific class, you need to make sure you know exactly what you're getting yourself into. That's what
Yes.
the session zeros are for. When you talk to the DM and they say, I don't allow crossbow expert, I don't allow the gunner feat, chances are nobody's going to want to play a ranged
Correct.
class. And if you say, okay, yes, I'm going to do that, my question is, what's the difference if somebody says, yeah, I want to be a great weapon fighter, and you say, well, no, a great weapon master is banned. Most people aren't going to want to use a great weapon because they don't get that powerful feat.
Right.
But chances are anybody that is using a great weapon to fight with is going to take great weapon master because that's just part of the archetype.
Correct.
So, I mean,
I,
that's
I
kind
will
of
give you
why
that.
it is.
I will give you that that's part of the archetype and that's why it exists.
Yes, but the fact that you're saying is they're useless without it, well, use a bow and arrow as opposed to a crossbow. If you want to use the the beefier weapon, the heavy crossbow and everything else, or the hand crossbow, yeah, I mean, it's the fact that you can fire 2 different hand crossbows, but you still do need to reload, like they say.
Mm-hmm.
It's if you're going to be taking a crossbow or a gun, that means you're probably going to be taking all the different feats that belong to it.
Right.
The only thing that, only thing that I agree with you on is that they should have gotten rid of the crossbow expert for the disadvantage. Because aside from that, there is, I mean, you don't need the feat to be useful in combat.
Right. You don't need it, but I do know some scenarios where you would feel useless without it. In some cases, like not being able to shoot multiple times, that's a little more for rangers than it is rogues, and even the fighters than it is rogues, not being able to attack multiple times in a round and win one round because you're using a crossbow. So getting
Yeah, but you're also doing more damage than just a regular longbow as well. Because the heavy
correct.
crossbows are D10s versus D8s. But yeah, the whole point is that it's an archetype that's meant to severely help a specific playstyle. If
Right.
you don't want to, rules as written, and homebrew aside, because the podcast is mainly about, like, we're talking about the rules as they are written, and then we're
Correct.
giving kind of our tweaks and everything that we would do. But for playing rules as written, if you're playing with a DM who's a stickler for the rules, you know, if they allow the feat, then this is what you need to be aware of. But most people that are going to take a crossbow are going to want the crossbow feat or the
Yes.
crossbow expert feat.
It is very enticing and almost a necessary pickup if you want to make crossbows the way you're playing your D&D game.
I would say it is.
Yeah.
Like, you have to take that before you even get the crossbow. And that is kind of what you're going to be looking at.
Or at least by the time you level 5.
Yes.
So, but if we'd like to continue on, we kind of talked about Ranger and then got sidetracked on the crossbow talk and the bow talk, which is we needed to do it.
That's going to be prevalent throughout the entirety of these three classes for sure.
Correct. The next one up, what do you have something to say?
Yeah, I was just going to say there is one thing that I just realized that I want to talk about at the end, which is something that uh, is kind of the culmination of the physical ranged class,
Okay.
which is probably the best reason to run a multi-class that I've ever seen.
Okay.
It happens to be with all three of the classes we're going to be talking about.
Alrighty.
So next up is the Rogue, or the Rouge, as everyone likes to call it.
The Rouge.
The Rogue, as we mentioned last time, is you get the extra attack and you get your sneak attack damage. The Rogues are stealthy, they're sneaky, they are mobile, and they have their cunning action, meaning you can take, if you do start to get swarmed, this is where we start talking about mobility again.
Mm-hmm.
You can use your bonus action to disengage instead of your action. Then you can run away and then you can take another pot shot. That's at level 2. So rogues, especially early on, are extremely mobile and able to get out of a swarm to the best ability of any of the three ranged classes. Fighters are typically a little more tanky, but then the rangers are kind of screwed on that point unless you're playing a specific subclass. But the rogues, with their cunning action, are able to do that to get away. And what most people do with a rogue, they take a shot with their bow. They use their bonus action to hide. So you break line of sight and then you try and hide. Because if you're hidden and they don't know where you are, you get advantage on your next attack, which will help with your crits, which will help with your sneak attacks, and really kind of focusing on that burst damage that nobody can see coming.
Right. Is there anything that would lean into the play style of a rogue that's different from the ranger? Because you did mention you're more mobile. You do more like one-shot pot shots to try to get that sneak attack damage. Is there anything else that you would need to think about when playing a ranged rogue compared to the ranged ranger, other than that sneak attack?
Well, up until level 3, up until you get your subclass, Rogue is far and away the better option simply because of that cunning action.
Right.
But up until you get your subclass and you pick which class you want to go in, Rogue is far and away the way to go. They are better in every single aspect
Right.
of playing a character. Not only do you get expertise in 2 different skills, which you can take stealth and sleight of hand or stealth and, dexterity. You also get the dexterity saving throws. Um, but once you get to level 2, you get your cunning action. At level 3, when you take your subclass, that's when everything kind of starts coming together for both classes, and they both become even more powerful.
Correct.
The rogues in particular have assassination, where you can, what is it? Is assassination the one where you get automatic crits on any?
The assassin, I do believe, gets an automatic crit on attacks from stealth out of combat.
Let's see. Assassinate. Starting level, 3rd level. You and your deadliest when you get the drop on your enemies. You have advantage on attack rolls against any creature that hasn't taken a turn in combat yet. In addition, any hit you score against a creature that is surprised is an automatic crit.
Yes.
Yeah. And that means your sneak attack crits also.
Yes, it's out of combat, first one to hit kind of thing. So your first turn, and that also sounds like first turn in combat, as long as you have sneak attack, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. So your first turn
that hasn't taken a turn in combat. Period.
Mm-hmm.
If you go before them, any hit that you do is an automatic crit. And assassinate means that you roll with advantage on any creature that you're rolling against that hasn't taken a turn because they are surprised.
That is just.
Now, hang on. Before you get there, the Ranger also has something under the Gloomstalker subclass. So the Gloomstalker Ranger has an ability called Dread Ambusher. At 3rd level, you master the art of the ambush. You give yourself a bonus to initiative rolls equal to your wisdom modifier. So there's a chance you can go first, or a higher chance you can go first.
Correct.
At the start of each turn, at the start of your first turn in each combat, you get 10 increased walking speed, so you can move further, which lasts until the end of that turn. If you take an attack action on that turn, you make 1 additional weapon attack as part of that action. If it hits, the target takes an extra d8 damage. So as a ranger at level 3, you move 40 feet on your first turn instead of 30 feet.
Correct.
For most races. And you get 2 attacks. So you basically get extra attack at level 3.
Correct.
For 1 turn in combat.
Right.
And if you do, that extra attack deals an extra d8 damage. So even if you're attacking with a d6 short bow, you're going to be doing potentially an extra 8 damage on top of that.
I think long run, the rogue's going to end up with more damage on that first turn if you take the assassin subclass. However, the Gloomstalker gives you a lot more passive flexibility, if that makes sense. You get the bonus movement speed, you get the bonus to your initiative rolls, and you get an extra d8. So if you're using a smaller weapon, you still get decent damage. The only problem I have with that, and it counts as an extra attack early game, like pre-level 5. So there's good things and bad things to both. The rogue gives you more upfront burst, and the Gloomstalker gives you more hits for more spread out damage and more flexibility in your positioning and your turn order.
Yep. And also, again, for a different Ranger subclass, this one in particular, the Horizon Walker Conclave, as a bonus action, you can choose 1 creature within 30 feet of you. The next time you hit a creature on this turn with a weapon attack, all damage dealt becomes force, and they take an extra 1d8 damage from the attack.
Right.
So again, Horizon Walker starts to give you that bonus action economy so that you can actually use your bonus action every turn as opposed to, being able to use it just for your hunter's mark kind of
Right.
thing.
And that's a rough thing with Rangers is using that bonus action. You mentioned it earlier, but when I was thinking about my current campaign, I have a Ranger that uses most of his spells to do Zephyr Strike to get bonus movement and not take attacks of opportunity and get a little bit bonus damage. And he
Yes.
uses it every other turn because he does not use the Hunter's Mark very often unless he's...
And he has the spell slots, or is Zephyr Strike a cantrip?
It's pretty sure it's a spell slot. He doesn't use it every turn, but he uses it more than Hunter's Mark. He uses Hunter's Mark when he's sitting still and he knows he's going to be hitting the same person over and over again.
Yeah, Hunter's Mark is typically used for bosses. If you're being swarmed by a
Yeah.
bunch of lower level enemies, then yeah, you're going to be using
Zephyr
something
Strike.
else instead of that.
But
Although you only have to cast Hunter's Mark once, you deal the damage, it'll one-shot something, and then your bonus action the next turn can be to move it to the next target that you're attacking.
Correct.
And you only have to cast it once per combat, pretty much.
Yeah. He just doesn't use it as often. He may not be playing optimally, but then again, as long as he's having fun,
Yeah.
I'm not going to
As
say
long as you're
anything.
having fun, that's the main part.
Yeah. But is there any noticeable weaknesses of the rogue? We just compared the two, and we talked about one of the strengths as being that burst damage. Is there any noticeable weakness compared to the ranger when it comes to the range damage?
I think the fact that you don't get magical damage, you can't change the type of damage that you get, which is one of the problems we were talking about with the melee classes.
Right.
Unless you get a magic weapon, the rangers can make it. They have ways to make the damage be force. They have a way to make it nature. They have spells, which rogues don't get unless you're taking a spell subclass. All rangers can cast some degree of spell casting.
Correct. Which gives them a lot more flexibility, in my opinion, which is the one reason I do like the ranger over the rogue when it comes to the range damage. But it's hard to pass up that sneak attack. That is such a strong strength for the rogue.
Yes, but I mean, the ability to commune with animals and the
Yeah.
tracking that kind of comes with that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you basically you become king of the forest.
Yeah.
But you also can cast Cure Wounds as a ranger.
Oh, which is so good early game, especially if without a healer.
Yes, can confirm.
Can confirm, 100%.
But yeah, so the Rangers, again, have a little more utility. I think they are. I have yet to find someone who plays a high level Ranger. Of course, my Ranger is still level 3, and I've been playing a level 3 Ranger for just about a year now. The Ranger class is a little more mobile, a little more supportive,
Okay.
a little more jack of all trades.
Okay.
Rogues do more burst damage and they seem to have more combat prowess, but they are not as useful outside of combat because rangers can still pick locks, rangers can still stealth, but rogues don't necessarily get that survivability and that RP utility as well outside of combat.
Outside of combat and also rogues outside of stealth missions and being sneaky. That's really what they excel at. The ranger can do it. They're not as good, but they also can do so much other things outside of combat. Like you said, with the commune with animals, having certain other spells, and I mentioned their tracking abilities that are just passives built in and features they have. But yeah, the strengths of both we've already mentioned: flexibility for the ranger, burst damage for the rogue, combat prowess for the rogue, and the option for spells as a ranger. The weakness of the rogue when it comes to the ranged rogue is the lack of spells and the lack of magic and damage type changing.
Unless you go with the Arcane Trickster rogue.
Right. Which even then is
Again,
a half caster.
Correct. Then it becomes a support class similar to the casting rangers.
And to that point, I also think it pulls from the wizard spell list, which does not have the range damage buffs that the ranger spell list does.
Correct.
So I know the ranger spell list has some spells that are very particular towards using ranged attacks and can change your damage type and augment what you can already do. The rogue would have access to none of those.
Yes, the rogue, if you want to become a spellcaster, you are a wizard. You have charm person, you have a number of like mage hand. That
Correct.
again, it becomes a utility class, and it kind of puts you on par with the ranger, aside from like the ability to cast cure wounds, I think.
Yeah.
Um, However, you can use mage hand to disarm traps at range. You can retrieve an object in a container carried by another creature. So if you're in combat and somebody has a potion, you can use mage hand to go through and grab that potion and bring it to you.
Right.
Like there are some abilities and positives to do that. And then obviously at the higher levels of Arcane Trickster, you can steal the knowledge of how to cast a spell from another spellcaster.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Forgot about that.
Spell Thief is a big one, but it's
Yeah.
at level 17. But immediately after a creature casts a spell that targets you or includes you in its area of effect, you can use a reaction to force the creature to make a saving throw with its spellcasting ability modifier. And on a failed save, you negate the spell's effect against you. You steal the knowledge of the spell, and for the next 8 hours, you know the spell and can cast it using your spell slots.
Yeah. It is very good once you get to the upper level stuff, because there's a lot of spells that go on during that. All right. I think that pretty much wraps up
Oh,
our rogue talk. Unless there's anything else you want to
yep.
add. There's
No.
one more that really fits that can really do that ranged physical damage type playstyle. And that one would be fighter.
Good
Specifically
old archery fighter.
with the
Dex fighter.
Dex fighter. Specifically with the archery fighting style. And
Yep.
you know more about this one than I do, so I'm going to let you take the lead on that.
Well, the fighter as a ranged is not much different from the melee fighter, and I haven't played a ranged fighter yet.
Oh.
However, you still get the extra attack. You still get, second wind and action surge. You get a lot of stuff that, being a melee fighter does. You can still wear heavy armor if you want, because you typically you're a fighter. You have the fighting style and whatnot. So they are a little bit of a beefier class. And if you are getting swarmed, having, plate armor and, being able to tank hits until you're able to get away is not a bad idea.
Mm.
But the fighters, I mean, it's literally the same thing as a dex based or finesse fighter in melee, but at a ranged ability. You can literally take pot shots, and if they get to you,
Right.
then you can pull out a dexterity weapon, or you will have taken the crossbow expert or gunner feat, and you're able to just keep shooting at point blank and ignoring the reload.
Right.
So all the same bonuses, all the same uh, pros and cons as last week still take place. You have your fighting style, which in this case is going to be archery, which is your +2 to hit. You have your second wind, so you can heal yourself as a bonus action. You have your action surge to take an extra action. You have your martial archetype, which, depending on what you want to do, if you want to be, a battle master and take your strikes. The only con is the fact that some of those battle actions or the maneuvers
Mm-hmm.
using your superiority dice have to be done based on melee attacks.
Yes, they have to have
So
a
that
melee
might not
weapon.
so that might not be the better subclass for you. However, I mean, there are a number of other subtypes that you can get.
Right.
If you wanted to do magical damage, you have the Rune Knight, the Eldritch Knight, the Psy Warrior.
Hmm.
If you want to be much more physical damage, you have the Samurai, you have the Champion, which is a little more defensive. Your Banneret is you can turn him into a support class, so you
Hmm.
can be a ranged support class, kind of providing,
Ooh.
whenever you take an action, your Banneret will allow you to call somebody's name and inspire them, and they're able to take an attack action on your turn.
Right.
And the one thing that I haven't come across yet is if I command you to take a melee attack, so you get an attack action. If you have extra attack, does that mean you make 2 swings?
Yes. When you make
Well,
so that's the same with what's it called? That's the way
Bardic
I
Inspiration.
run. That's the way I run attacks of opportunity. You're taking an attack action towards them. If you have multi attack and you take your attack action has 2 swings applied to it. So if you have multi attack, anytime you
But
take the
that is
attack
not
action,
raw, though, is it?
that's the way I've always run it, because if you have multi attack, it's your attack action that you take. Now, I may have just read it wrong, but it's always worked for me. It's never been a problem in our case. And that could be wrong, but that's how I've run it. And also with second wind, you get a second action you can do, and you take the attack action. You're attacking 4 times if you have multi attack.
You're talking action surge.
Action surge, that's what I mean, not second wind.
Yes, absolutely.
That's definitely how that one works.
I know. Because that is you're getting an extra action.
Right. I'm actually curious about this now. Hold on.
Yeah, I'm gonna look it up too.
Op D5E. Attack of opportunity 5E. Opportunity attack a creature hostile. 1 melee attack, not attack action. So yeah, it's just 1.
Okay, that's what I was thinking, because that seems
No, it reads
if
just 1.
Yeah, because if you can imagine, Sentinel,
getting three or 4 attacks at in game.
No, getting 2 attacks on an attack of opportunity and knocking them down with Sentinel, so their movement becomes 0. So they have to stand up, and then you knock them down again with 2 attacks on your turn.
Right. Oh
with
man.
action surge, that's 4 attacks on your turn, plus somebody.
All right. Yeah, I see. I see what you mean.
Attack again for another 2.
I see what you mean.
That's 6 times to just keep knocking them down, and at that point, you are a great weapon fighter monk. Can you imagine that?
No, I don't want to.
Yeah,
I don't
2d6
know.
plus 2d6 fire from a flame tongue with 6 attacks per turn with Sentinel.
How dare you? I do not like this.
Exactly.
I do not like this line of reasoning. Oh no.
Again, this whole ranged and melee physical damage dealers, their biggest weakness is magical damage, which is why they have a few subclasses that don't give them extra attacks or don't give them a lot of extra damage. But those subclasses will really allow you, until you get a magic weapon, or if you know you're going to get a magic weapon, or if you know you're not going to get a magic weapon, excuse me. If you know you're not going to get a magic weapon, those subclasses will help allow you to not feel useless against things that are resistant to physical damage.
Correct.
One of the things in my Lost Minds of Phandelver thing, when I'm playing the Battlemaster Rogue multiclass, is where everybody is casting Hellish Rebuke and Searing Light or is it Searing Pain? And smites and this and that, and doing damage against these undeads, while here I am trying to stab a skeleton and doing half damage with my 1d8 plus 2 or 1d8 plus 4. Like, I might be doing 5 damage to a skeleton while somebody else is doing 30 damage to a skeleton at level 3 or 4. The magic damage makes a difference against half the creatures that you come across in Magic
Yes.
or in Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah.
So being able to find a way to do magic damage might just turn the tides and tip the scales in favor of a subclass that you normally wouldn't be interested in playing because of the benefits and the utility that it gives you.
Correct.
Because otherwise, you're going to be fighting against something that has, 19 AC, and if you only have a +4 to attack, you still have to roll a 15 in order to hit. So
Which
that's
is not
one out
good.
of 4 chances you're going to hit.
Right.
Whereas if you have a paladin and you end up smiting, or if you have something that's going to give you +2 to hit, or you're going to do something that, is not a roll to hit, it's just a save that they need to make.
Mm-hmm.
If your save is 15 or so, chances are you're casting something that a heavy plated fighter is not going to be able to get rid of. So spells are obviously the way to go for nice and consistent damage against creatures like that.
Yes, that's definitely the way to go if that's what you're really lacking is that magic damage.
Yes. But do you have any other pros or cons about the fighters?
The only pros and cons I can think of, I'd have to compare it back to the Rogue and Ranger. The pro I see with the fighter is the ability to wear the heavier armor, even with a lower strength score, and you're really going for that dex build. You can still wear the heavier armor and get a natural AC higher than the other two, period. Heavy armor plus high dex, regardless, is good. You get a high AC. You can easily crack 20 just by wearing the heavy armor and having a +5 AC because that's what you're pumping, because that's your damage modifier with bows. So that's the one upside I see off the bat. The only real downside I see compared to the others is the lack of ability to augment the ranged attacks specifically. Rogues get their sneak attack damage all the time. Rangers get their different augments and spells and different abilities to help them out. The fighter isn't really made to do that. It has some things to help it out here and there, has some feats, has some different abilities you can pick up depending on your subclass. But in the end, you're going to be a little less valuable when it comes to raw damage output with a bow as a fighter than you would be with your melee weapons. There are the action surge that can really help out, but you end up falling behind. And another thing with that action surge is you lose mobility as a fighter. Rogues get their bonus action disengage, bonus action dash. Rangers, depending on your subclass, get different bonuses to their movement, different movement abilities, and things along that nature. Fighters really don't get that other than action surge, I believe, or certain abilities that let them charge and get closer to people, which is not your goal as a ranged fighter. So they really sit in this.
Agree with that.
Yeah, they sit in this weird spot where they can be fun, but you're really going to have to nitpick what class you go, what abilities you pick up, what armors and weapons you're looking for. You'd really have to talk to your DM and make sure you get things that make you feel and make you viable is not what I want to say, because it is viable, but make you feel like you have an impact, because you're going to lose out compared to the other two classes that seem to be made to be able to use ranged weaponry. Now, another point I want to make real fast is javelins, which fighters can use excellently. It's not as long of a range, but they still, I believe, fall under strength.
Yes, they do.
So if you do want to play that, well, what subclass was it? The Banneret?
Yes, Banneret.
The Banneret subclass, you can really do the javelin throws if you want to keep that strength build and be able to deal with people up close really, really well with a heavy hitting weapon and throw javelins really far. That is something to look at, to buff your allies with the Banneret class and still be able to pick people off with good javelins. Maybe you can talk to your DM about getting some custom javelins kind of made for you, some that replenish so you don't have to buy them all the time, because you can't theoretically hold as many as you can arrows. It means as many javelins as you can arrows. So that is always something to keep in mind, is there are other ranged weapons that just don't fit ranger and rogue because you need that strength. Another one I can think of is throwing a trident or spears that you can throw.
Yes, but tridents are only 1d6.
My,
So,
yeah,
yes, you can throw them, but yeah, chances are you're not going to want to throw a trident because you only get one.
and
It's
let
not like javelins that you carry a quiver of them, kind of
mhm.
like arrows.
Yeah, and to that point, there's other ways to get around that. Like I have a character in my campaign right now that has a trident that he can call back to him with a bonus action. So he can attack, call it back, attack again with his throw. I let him do that because typically you wouldn't be able to. But I let him do it because it's kind of the way that his play style fits that build we have going right now. And some DMs won't allow that. Sometimes you don't get a weapon that fits that play style. But it's just things to keep in mind that your fighter's going to, no matter what you do, really feel a little lacking in things to help your ranged playstyle work better. Not saying it's not going to work. It's just rangers get movement, rogues get movement, rangers and rogues get buffs to their range damage in some form. Fighters really don't get that. They get a lot of things they can do, but none of them are really focused on that ranged playstyle, if that makes sense.
Yes, it does. And kind of to piggyback on top of that, um, some of the things that we haven't discussed are the higher level abilities that everything gets.
Right.
And to your point, the rangers at 8th level, you get land stride, which means you basically can pass through non-magical plants without being slowed down. You have advantage on saving throws against plants that are magically manipulated or manipulated to impede movement. It's basically you take no penalty moving through difficult terrain. At 10th level, you can camouflage yourself and you can basically hide in plain sight.
Right.
If you spend a minute creating camouflage, again, out of combat utility.
Yes.
At 14, you get vanish. You can use the hide action as a bonus action.
Right.
And you can't be tracked by non magical means unless you choose to leave a trail. Again,
Out
vanish
of
at level
combat.
14 is similar to using the hide as your bonus action as a rogue at level 2.
Mm-hmm.
But the rangers get, again, out of combat utility for movement, for tracking, for survival. Got it. The rogues get much more evasion. And when I say evasion, I mean literally evasion.
Literally.
Yes, at 5th level, when an attacker that you hit sees you, or that you can see when they hit you with an attack, you can use your reaction to have the damage against you. Just because. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
here's my reaction. I take half damage. F you. At
Right.
level 7, you get an ability called evasion. You can nimbly dodge out of the way of certain effects, like a fire, a breath attack from a dragon or an ice storm spell. If it's an AoE thing, when you're suggested to an effect that allows you to make a dex throw to take half damage, if you make it, you take
No
no
damage.
damage
Yeah.
and only half damage if you fail. So again, it's more of a defensive and mobility type of uh, attributes that you get and bonuses that you get for that. The fighters, what do they get? They get Indomitable. It's more damage. And Indomitable is basically at 9th level, you can reroll a saving throw that you fail. If you do, you must use the new roll, which is not damage, as I first thought.
Right.
But yes, it's a deck save, it's a con save, it's any sort of saving throw that gives you kind of advantage on surviving, but it doesn't give you mobility. Is the point? It doesn't take anything. It helps you with the one big weakness that most melee or most physical damage dealers have, which is saving throws for spells. Charisma, intelligence, and wisdom saving throws are key
Mm-hmm.
to surviving as a physical.
Right. Which sometimes is very difficult to do because that's not the stats you want to put a lot of points into. For some of the classes, at least. But the last couple things I really want to touch on. Was there something else you wanted to say first?
Yes. Now that we've gone over the pros and the cons for each of those, I do want to touch on my pet project, if you will, which is combining all the best of every single ranged physical class that you can have. It is my penultimate physical build. And at level 20, you're able to do close to 2,000, potentially 21 or 2,200 damage on the first turn of combat.
Mm-hmm.
And it takes 4 levels in the Ranger, 4 levels in the Rogue, and 12 levels in Fighter.
Okay.
Let's start with the Ranger because it's the first one that we discussed. You take the Gloomstalker for the Dread Ambusher. So you get to move an extra 10 feet. You get that extra Dread Ambusher attack.
Okay.
With that extra attack and everything else, you also have the sneak attack damage from the Rogue.
Right.
And you have the Assassinate ability.
Right.
So all your hits on the first turn of combat, when you're adding your Wisdom modifier to your initiative and everything else, any ability or any attack that you make is an automatic crit if it hits.
Mm-hmm.
And with advantage on all your attacks, with your extra attack from Ranger or from your Fighter, because you're hitting level 5 in Fighter and everything else. But in level 12, you take, what was it? It was Battle Master for your Fighter.
Right.
So you have your superiority dice. So, first turn, I'm going to go through and I'm going to Hunter's Mark something.
Okay. Right? Hunter's Mark.
Bonus action Hunter's Mark. So you get your extra d6 for every attack that hits. And then that can crit, if I recall correctly.
Yes, it does.
But I go in and now I'm making my attacks. I have my first attack. I have my extra attack. I have my Dread Ambusher attack. All made at advantage. And with the Dread Ambusher being first, I forgot to mention, however your DMs apply poisons, Purple Worm Poison is fantastic. And if you have a bonus bow and whatnot, I mean, this is on everything.
Assuming everything goes perfectly.
Yes, assuming you have whatever items you want. You're level 20, obviously, so it's a high level campaign. Chances are you're going to have an oath bow. So with your oath bow, you target whatever it is. Anything that's not resistant to physical damage. And right. This is why I mentioned that earlier. So you can't pull this off against a Tarask. You might be able to pull it off against a Lich or an Ogre or a Dragon, anything of this sort. Mm-hmm. So you play your Purple Worm Poison, you hit them with a Hunter's Mark, and then you go for Dread Ambusher. Chances are, it's an automatic crit because you have the advantage. You probably have plus 12 to hit or plus 13 to hit at this point. But you hit them with that. It's your D, whatever it is, 1d8, I think it is, with the Oath Bow, plus your 1d6.
Okay.
For Hunter's Mark, plus your 1d8 for Dread Ambusher, plus your, whatever it is, 2d6 from the Oath Bow.
Right.
And all that crits. So if it's your
Double.
rolls plus, it's your rolls doubled, or it's your rolls like our DM on Friday nights it's all your double rolls are just max damage plus whatever you roll.
Okay.
So you hit him with that. You hit him with another attack, which is going to have all those bonuses except the Dread Ambusher bonus, which is just 1d8. So you hit him for X plus X minus 1d8. You then make your third attack, which is your extra attack. So now you've done Dread Ambusher, normal attack, extra attack, swing. You then hit them with the Action Surge and do the same thing again, minus the Dread Ambusher. So you get another 2 attacks.
Okay.
So now you're at 5 attacks with whatever it is, the
Jesus.
almost 200 damage each because the purple worm poison is hitting. They're all critting. And yeah, it just goes absolutely
well, what about the
berserk.
sneak attack on the first one?
Yeah, sneak attack.
Did you mention that?
Which is what, 3d6, I think?
By that point, you only get it for the 4 levels
You
of
get it
rogue.
for
So I
one
think,
attack.
and it's only 4 levels of rogue. So I'm pretty sure it's only like 3d6. You're right.
At level 4, it's 2d6.
2d6.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's a little bit on top, which also crits.
But I mean, yes, and yeah, it's
Whoa.
just it is the perfect assassin sneak attack, just one shot the thing.
Yeah.
When my DM for Friday Games will put us up against a Tarask,
Mhm.
which is silly because it's against a Tarask. Tarask is immune to all poison, and even with it being immune to poison, I did half its life at over 1,000 hit points in my first turn as a pure physical character.
Jesus Christ.
And that's because it's resistant to physical damage. So it only takes half damage. And I was able to do 468 or 486 damage.
Jeez.
Which, I mean, if you think about it,
he's just dead.
Well, no, the Tarask had, I think it was 1,100.
But is he going to die soon? Yeah.
Well,
is he
if
hurt?
It's not immune to all the rest of the magic things, yeah. But then it goes through, and the Tarask started CCing everybody by swallowing them and grabbing them and whatnot. So it's a matter of trying to escape and using the mobility to not die in one turn on the backswing.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, somebody did a YouTube video on it as well, and it's just the math on it is insane. Yeah. Again, because melee damage, and then you can keep that up. I mean, yeah, you've used your action surge, but every chance after that, you're still hitting for 4 attacks.
That's just so much damage, man.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
You can't do that as a caster, even casting level 9 spells.
Don't do that.
Correct. So, I mean, again, it's fun to play physical damage character, whether that be melee or ranged, because you can do silly stuff like that.
Yeah, and part of it also for the physical characters is you really have to make it your own. You really can't just jump into it, just pick something random and enjoy it. You really got to sit down, think about what you really want to do, and make that character you make your own. If that makes sense. Otherwise, you're going to be every other ranger. Shoot, bonus action, hunter's mark, shoot. You got to make the outside of combat stuff your own. And with the melee classes we talked about last week, a lot of them is just attack, augment your attack this time, attack. And putting your own character on it, putting your own spin on it, talking to your DM really can help make those classes pop because they don't get the elemental stuff to go with them. They don't get the interesting spells that like transcend reality and physics. So it's really up to you and your game to make them special.
Yeah, and that all comes back to finding your character concept. If you want to play a wandering salesman who happens to be a cleric and they peddle alchemy supplies, then there's your concept. Figure out what class kind of works for that. Or if you want to be, old kung fu movies, you want to be a janitor and you want to happen to know monk abilities, you can absolutely do that.
Right.
But something is not going to be fun unless you can find a way to make it fun. I mean, D&D is just guidelines. Yeah. It's interactive storytelling. And if you don't create a character that you enjoy, chances are others might not enjoy it either. So find something that you want to play, and if you want to do this, do it. Yeah, make it yours, give it a personality, and have a blast with it.
It's all up to the player. all up to you to make it fun. But with that, is there really anything else you want to cover? We're at about an hour.
No, I mean, I think that's it. I mean, aside from that, everything else that's going to be range is going to be kind of utility and support classes, which I think we can touch base on next week, unless we want to move on to Magic.
I think we can move on to Magic and touch base on them as we hit them, because next week it might be a little longer because there's so many Magic classes, and they all kind of fit under an umbrella.
Into a couple different ones, yeah. But I'm talking like bards and
right,
the paladins, which are kind of, it's magic, but it's not.
Yeah,
kind of half classes. I think that that should be one of the things. Bards, artificers, paladins, druids.
Right.
I mean, those should all be kind of one subclass of utility / half casters / miscellaneous. And then next week we can do wizards, warlocks, and sorcerers.
Okay. Well,
and clerics. Obviously, you can't forget the clerics.
Oh yeah, cleric, my second favorite class, of course. So, I think that's pretty much it for this week on SideQuestRPG Podcast. Keep an eye out. This should be uploaded tonight. Keep an eye out tomorrow for the YouTube video. I'm sorry about the one from 2 weeks ago. It was not letting me upload, and it will be uploaded Friday the 18th, as it should have been 2 weeks ago. Keep an eye out next week for another video and podcast. We will be talking about probably utility casters or damage casters in Dungeons and Dragons. And pretty soon, once I finish my playthrough of Elden Ring, I will want to sit down and have a good talk, an in-depth talk about as much as I can, not spoiling the game for other people, because that game is really good. It is a very good RPG. Probably once I get done with it, I'm going to have my thoughts on it gathered up. But I've only got about 40 hours in the game, and it is probably it is so good. It's probably going to be my game of the year, if not game of the last 2 years. And that's pretty high praise, and I've only got 40 hours, and it's a lot of what other people are saying, but it's not wrong, if that makes sense. So,
well, that's awesome. I'm excited to hear your thoughts.
I
haven't played it yet.
Yeah.
I know I'm going to. It's just not going to be anytime soon.
Yeah, I have my thoughts gathered up on it. I want to get a little further into the game, almost to end game, if not beat the game, by the time we have an episode on it. Because I want to have a full, cohesive thoughts on the game and my take on it. But keep an eye out for that. I want to shout out my YouTube channel and my Twitch, Smug_F5, should be on both. And I have a D&D game every Friday night on Twitch that gets moved over to YouTube a week later. And anything else you want to shout out?
Yeah, I've got my Twitch channel, and the Western Winds is going to be on episode 46 tomorrow night, Friday, the 18th at 8 p.m. Pacific, twitch.tv /the_Mindz. Mindz with the MINDZ or Z if you're across the pond.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, everyone, and I will see you next week.
We'll see you next week. Bye.